The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast.
That's true.
Any of the fire content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
Unless you're abusing people, then I have a problem maligning you.
Also, we're not doctors, psychologists, or wizards. We're just two non-experts trying to make you a friendly, informative podcast that helps you understand culty shit. Hey everybody, Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story, we met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So it's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM. Still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the wind, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of A Little Bit Culty. Hope you are all having an incredible summer and staying out of culty things.
And this one is going to be about acting. Thank you.
Are you an actor? Are you a thespian?
We're two working actors. Not now, obviously, because of the strike. But before this podcast, we had our fair share of culty stories from the world of acting classes. But since we started this show, we have gotten an outpouring of requests to delve into the culty side of living the life of a thespian.
And we've heard some hair-raising stories about one acting teacher in particular who is at the heart of today's episode. But look, since forever, actors have put themselves in their characters' shoes to portray fictional emotion, and many take intense and super spendy classes to improve their technique, to be a better actor, to deepen their craft. But how far should this training go?
And who do you trust to help elevate your craft when it's a pretty vulnerable practice already? Great questions.
So today's show gets into the weeds of an alleged acting class shit show. Here are the high-level bullet points for you. 26 ex-students recently spoke up about their experience under the tutelage of Michelle Lonsdale Smith in a revelatory story published in The Cut.
We have that link in our show notes for you.
Michelle Lonsdale Smith, or MLS as we'll refer to her in the show, is by many accounts allegedly a pretty dogmatic leader who claims her techniques help actors tell the truth about their unresolved human motivations. But her methods may sound a little bit culty to you.
They definitely set off alarm bells for us, but allegedly. Our three guests today are ex-students of the MLS culty acting classes, each with their own thriving careers in film, theater, television, directing, and development. They've got some things to say.
Alberta Main Bly, Brooke Henderson, and Aaron Boyes. Welcome to A Little Bit Culty. Well, welcome everybody to this week's episode of A Little Bit Culty. We have three fabulous guests. This is such a full circle episode because we've been talking about this subject in kind of shadowed terms since literally day one of this podcast, because this is about an acting teacher who not only I studied with in the early 2000s, but I left, if you've heard this podcast before, because I found it a little bit culty. Didn't have the language for why it was culty until much later. But these three brave women stuck around or came later in the last 20 years and spent way more time than I ever did with this acting teacher and have much more in-depth stories to share. We'll just start with the basics. Who are you? What's your name? And maybe we'll also start with your brief history with MLS. Alberta, please introduce yourself and share with us how long you studied with them.
My name is Alberta, and I studied with Michelle for 7 years, from 2006 to 2011.
And you're in LA now?
I'm in LA. I came down here to produce a play for Michelle, and I wasn't interested in coming to Los Angeles. My agent didn't want me to come to Los Angeles, but I came, and here I am.
Amazing. This is also a great time to share a fun fact and just break the ice a little bit that Alberta also used to waitress at a restaurant called
The Elbow Room.
And who did you serve breakfast to?
Every Wednesday, I would serve breakfast to you and Mark while you were there planning your school.
That's crazy.
And at the time, you would tell me about the school that you were organizing. And I said, that sounds a little bit culty.
Amazing. And here we are.
And now and again, you would say, you should come check it out. And I'd go, sounds a little culty.
Going to continue with my acting class.
And meanwhile, I was in a culty acting class
Yeah.
that you thought was a little bit culty. So we have a very funny history that way.
I love that.
That's pretty funny.
This is Nippy finding this out for the first time. Erin, please introduce yourself and you can also share a fun fact.
Oh gosh, no pressure. I'm Erin Boys. I'm an actor, an acting teacher, coach, and producer. And after I left the studio, I went to finish my psych degree, and that's when I went into teaching after that. And I'm a mom.
We connected at the play gym when your daughter and my son were a few months old, and you just left the studio and The Vow had just come out. And you were like, yeah, I totally get your experience because I think I was in something kind of culty too. How's that? You want that one?
Yes, I will regurgitate that one.
These are our connections. It's just such a weird, small, bizarre little world, all these things.
It was. You know what? I knew your name. I knew your name from around Vancouver when I lived here previously as an actor. And actually, what's funny to me is when I went back into, because I would always take a couple of years away and come back to the acting studio. And when I came back at one point, there were some actors in my class who were part of something called Nexium, and they were quite high up in this thing. And I remember Michelle calling them out for being in a cult and trying to take over her position as a teacher, and how their language and the way that they approached the work, their work ethic, they felt very high on themselves and that they were trying to teach the class instead of be in the mix of everybody else.
So Michelle thought they had too much ego because of their work ethic and their status in the other company.
Well, she would know.
She's probably right.
She would.
Michelle, that's called projection. Okay, let's move on.
I knew of your name when we first met at the postpartum spin class. You said, do you know who I am?
I said, do you know who I am?
You said, I think we know each other in some capacity, because I think you were feeling insecure at the time about the cloud that was coming of this book and this show and everything. And so there was a little sensitivity around it.
The book was out. The Vow had not yet, because our little ones, I think, were like a few months old.
Your book was out in 18. The Vow was fall of 20.
Yeah.
I feel like we met when Ace and Lyric were just a few months old. And just for the record, they're both 4 now and they're BFFs. So that marks our relationship at exactly 4 years, Erin and I. And Brooke is actually the only one who I've only met on the phone. So Brooke, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Brooke. I currently live in North Vancouver, but I live in Toronto, which is where I studied with the studio and M. My time with Michelle, I think it was around 2 years. It was from 2013 into 2015. Currently, I'm just taking a little break from acting because it's been a weird couple of years, you know? So I've kind of pivoted my focus more into, I'm doing my postgrad in art therapy and really wanting to facilitate healing through art and with art instead of the experience that I had. So that's kind of been my reclamation journey of all of this. And I guess fun fact is I actually studied with Erin for the whole time I was there. So Erin, and that was my, I guess.
And I've studied with Alberta and with Brooke, and Alberta was someone I looked up to a lot in the studio as an actor and then as a producer. And then when she got out, she's been a leader in so many ways. So I'm really proud of her.
Awesome. Yeah, Alberta has been actually my sort of touchstone to this story because we've been trying to do this episode since the beginning, since this podcast started.
It's been in the background a while.
It's been in the background a while, and there's been a lot of people who just didn't want to talk about it. But now that the article's out there and 26 people have come forward, it's remarkable what that does for people's confidence to share stories. But regardless, the three of you are very brave to come on this podcast. I hope there are no repercussions, but there's obviously always that chance. Mostly social repercussions, I think. Just there's going to be people who are not happy that any of us are doing it. But that's what happens when you speak truth, unfortunately.
And I should mention, I was in the studio from 2006 until 2015, off and on.
I think I was only there for like 3 or 4 months. So I'm the baby. I'm the least knowledgeable on the subject. Okay, so like all of our episodes, and this will probably be the most obvious question, but just to share a little bit about why you joined, what you were signing up for, what was the promise, or what had you heard about Michelle's class? Like, what was the appeal and what was good about it?
So I joined shortly after I had a coach, Michael David Sims, and he left town. He sort of retired from teaching. So I couldn't find a class that made me work hard. There was a lot of classes where I would do a scene for 2 weeks and move on. And I didn't find anything I could really sink my teeth into or that was like hard or scary. So I had friends tell me about Michelle, and she really makes you work hard. She's like no other teacher. There was this like mystical thing around her about how much work there was. And she was compared to Larry Moss. She's like a mini Larry Moss, is what a friend of mine would say. So I actually had a bad experience with one of the teachers at Lyric previously. It was just very dark. So I was a little bit reluctant, but I went because I couldn't find anywhere else to study in Vancouver. And normally she made you audition, but she didn't ask me to audition. We just met, we talked, and she had this like aura, like she was scary, and I wanted to please her. Like right away, I felt that. And so I joined, and you have to join for 3 months. So I joined for the 3 months. And for those 3 months, there was a lot of very strange personal notes about the way I would have sex and like weird things that I'd never experienced in a class. And I had sirens in my head, like, this is not right. And so we would fight a lot. And then before my 3 months was up, she pulled me aside and said, I need you to just say yes. Even if you don't agree with what I'm saying, just say yes and everything will be okay. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I can play along, which is what I did. That kept me there. I guess that was my way of rationalizing the weird stuff that she would say. And then I would get these strange notes and I would just say yes, but I didn't agree with them.
And when you said the thing about sex, what do you mean? Like she was giving you notes about like, or asking you about your sex life?
Yeah, like how I would have sex with my boyfriend and how many times I had sex. And I have a friend that still makes fun of me about it because I was like a deer in the headlights. Like, why are we talking about this? This has nothing to do with my acting. I found it very strange, like a lot of boundaries being pushed at the very beginning. And the only way I was able to get past that was to just ignore everything that she said and just agree. And so that took away my critical thought because then I wasn't challenging anything she was saying. I would let her say whatever she wanted and I would just agree with it. And to be quite honest, I don't remember most of the stuff she said initially about any of the things because I just went along with it. And I didn't realize the danger of that initially because that made the strange stuff okay for other people. They thought they should just accept the weird notes because I was just accepting the weird notes.
So what I'm hearing is like with all of these things that we talk about, including NXIVM and all the tools, like if somebody has your best intentions at heart and wants to help you grow, you just saying yes and trusting the process could be a good thing in theory. But if she wants to manipulate you or extract value from you or push your boundaries, it makes you incredibly vulnerable and ripe for abuse because what you're saying is I'm agreeing to be obedient no matter what.
Exactly. And that was the way to get ahead in her class was to be obedient.
Otherwise, you're in resistance.
Which that was her thing. You're in resistance. And when you're in resistance, you're a danger to the entire room.
And if you say, I'm not in resistance, it's proof that you're in resistance. So you have to say, oh my goodness, yes, I'm in resistance. How can I prove that I'm not? I have to obey you.
Obey.
Well, you answered my second question already, which is great. And maybe we'll just roll those two questions together. How'd you get in? And what were the first sort of red flags? And that was a great example. Great example. So we'll come back to you shortly. Erin, how did you get in and what were some of your first red flags? How did you hear about it? What did you think you were signing up for?
So I had recently moved from Delaware, where I grew up, to Vancouver, and I was studying in another studio at the time. And I was obsessed with it. I loved it from the time I started acting, because I had gone to an art school for 7 years when I was younger and then ended up in Vancouver. And the scene study and things, I just couldn't get enough of it. And I thought the teachers were great. And I was getting so much positive feedback at this studio. So I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. And then I had heard tricklings from other students, I think as I was researching other schools and stuff. And somebody mentioned Michelle and Lyric. And there were a couple different teachers, and like you had to audition to get in with certain levels. There was beginner, medium, more advanced, whatever. And it was different teachers teaching different levels. And so I applied and was so excited when I got a one-on-one audition with Michelle, directly with this entity that I had been hearing about. And so I went in for this one-on-one with her in a room. And I still think back to it. My heart starts to race the first time that I met Michelle, because there's been many students who have physically tried to reenact Michelle because she had so many physical things that she did, that she had this character. And so she would sit with her knees closed and her hands in between her knees, and she wouldn't talk. She'd be quiet and she'd just wait for you and look at you like she was expecting, you've got me, you have my time, what are you here for? So she wouldn't really speak much. And so I remember sitting in front of her, and I was I think I was 21, and had no idea really what I was doing. I didn't know what art was. I didn't know what acting was at the beginning. I was just having fun in scene study class. And so in front of her, I did this monologue, and I think back, and the monologue was so telling. There was so much in that monologue that I chose that set me up for notes for what my vulnerabilities were, because it was about family trauma and a relationship with a mother that was very toxic. And there was just all this stuff that was like, take me, I'm vulnerable, as a early 20s. And so I did this monologue, and she said, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done here. If you want to be an actor, that's what you're here for. What is it I can do for you? And I was like, how do I answer? I don't even know how to answer that. Anyway, she took me into the class, and I remember what hooked me, well, the room was dark. It was this big room, and you'd walk in and the lights would be dim. And it just was this constant tension. Even walking into the hallway, it felt like I was walking like the Green Mile, how you're walking into death row. That's what it felt like, walking up the stairs into the studio and into this hallway. And there's something very addictive about that. Like, it hooks you. It's the adrenaline of going into something dangerous. And that's what it felt like. There was so much tension and fear in that space. So I was drawn towards that. And in the first class, I remember watching an actress who was extremely pregnant, and it was like a first day exercise, which I didn't know what that meant, and where she was working on a monologue she'd been developing, and she was rolling around on the ground, and I think she got naked. And I might be combining two stories too, because there was one woman who was pregnant, and there was another woman who got naked and was writing a one-woman show. And it was just, at that time, I just remember seeing people get naked and women trying to own their bodies. And it just, at that time, I was like, whoa, whatever that is, this is nothing I've ever seen before. So this must be really good work. That's all I remember thinking, because that teacher's sitting over there in the corner making sounds. And if those students will let her tear them apart like that, she must be really good at what she does, because the notes were not positive that she was giving. They were destructive. Now that I look back, like when I saw people get naked and do this very vulnerable stuff, they were crying, they were bringing up family drama and trauma and deep secrets. But then her response would be, you're lying. I don't believe you. You can go deeper, that kind of stuff. So it just set up this like hierarchy of, doesn't matter how vulnerable people are, she will know if you're lying. Like, only she knows the truth. And there was an acting student who did a scene, and he ended up punching a glass window. And there was something about that, the way that she reprimanded him and the way that she was reprimanding young men up there as well, like putting them in their place, was something that hooked me as well. I had never seen a woman put men regularly in their place in that way, like humiliating them. Not that she didn't do it to women either, but I had never seen that kind of thing before, and that they wanted more, like that they were hungry for it. They wanted to be treated badly by her. It was a very bizarre in your early 20s when you're seeing that. It was a lot.
Erin, those are great descriptions. I'm just curious, when you talked about that hallway, is this the studio in Gastown?
Lyric.
Lyric? Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny, when you described it, it brought back a lot of memories. So Nippy, this is also where I studied. And you should walk up like 3 flights of stairs and it's down this dark hall. It's a beautiful space. But I will tell you, you're absolutely right, Erin. And I think this is part of the whole mystique around it. If you want to be a serious actor, like walking into a space that's kind of gritty, like there's this grit, right? Like there's this, this must have been what it was like in the 50s, 60s, 70s in New York with like Strasbourg and like the best of the best. Like, didn't they try to like bring up that vibe and that feeling? And I feel like what you just described as it's kind of dangerous. Like you're going into it, you're doing it, you're agreeing to put yourself on the chopping block in a way.
Absolutely.
And there's something exhilarating about that. I hadn't thought of it in that way. That's really interesting. Thank you. We will come back to you for more. Brooke, what was your introduction and your hook and some of the first initial things you saw?
Yeah, it was really interesting listening to Erin talk, but because there's a lot of similarities there. I was also like in my early 20s when I started. Just to touch on the hallway thing too, like I didn't study at the same physical studio. I was in Toronto, but the same thing. I had the same walking up the stairs, like going class. Somebody was talking about cults. I've been doing a lot of like cult digging after the article came out, just because it's been so fresh in my mind. And someone was talking about how one of the things, because I was trying to figure out, like, why did I get so hooked? Like, what was it? Why didn't I see the red flags earlier? And someone was like, it's the challenge. And Michelle would often say, like, this isn't for every actor. You have to be at a certain stamina. You have to be at a certain like level to be here. And I remember being so young and being like, I can do that. Like, sign me up. I can do this. And I think that challenge is what kept me staying, because I didn't want to feel like I failed if I left, even though there were alarm bells going off. So anyways, I just wanted to touch on that because I totally remember that fear of walking up to the classroom. So I went to a film school in Vancouver and I was graduating and I was moving back to Toronto. So I asked the head of the program, like, who was a good teacher to go to in Toronto. I didn't know any acting coaches. And it's funny now looking back on it, because the school I went to, a lot of the teachers there actually had such a relationship to Michelle from Lyric. And I didn't know that. Like, I was almost like set up to go there. Not really, but that's how it felt, just because all of my acting coaches were from Lyric. And then I guess the reason why I trusted this coach in particular when I asked, where do I study in Toronto? When I was in film school, I lost a parent. Everything was very raw. And what I liked about it being in film school is that the coaches were really okay with dealing with the raw emotion. Like, they weren't tiptoeing around it. They were dealing with it. So I think when I went to Michelle's studio in Toronto, again, it was like I'm in this environment where people are dealing with the raw emotions and letting me have them. So I think that was another reason why I was like, this is quote unquote a safe space, because I can just be emotional and sad, even though it was not safe. But me showing up sad in a way was safe. And they would let me sit with that in a way, even though it was eventually like weaponized and things changed. So my first inklings of things that were culty, they would often tell you and encourage you to bring family members or friends to come audit, which I always kind of felt weird about, because I knew people were going to think, like, what are you doing? So I brought a boyfriend at the time to come, because I was too scared to bring my mom. I knew if I brought my mom, she'd be like, no. So I brought the second person, who was the boyfriend at the time. And I was doing this scene, and it was like a relationship scene, but kind of like a breakup scene. And again, we were getting into like these weird personal notes. And I was quite young, and it was my first boyfriend. And she asked me if I had ever cheated on a partner before. And I was like, no, which was true. But I was also like, why are you asking this in front of my partner? And she kept prying and kept prying and kept prying, because obviously you have to say yes because you're in resistance. So eventually I just went on this tangent, how I wish I cheated on a boyfriend or something like that. I think I just made something up. And then she said she was like so impressed with my honesty, even though it was all fabricated, because she wouldn't lay off me. And I think she realized that I was young, and that if she pushed just a little bit, I would do whatever she said. So then I got like the invite to go study in New York, which was all of the retreats were just like They would talk about it like it was Disneyland or something. If I didn't go to a retreat and then they all came back, they would make sure to make a big deal about it, about how it was so transformative and how you weren't there. There's no excuse not to be there. It's yada, yada, yada. So I missed the first one. So I was like, I have to go to New York. So then I think she saw that I was, she'd push a little bit and I would admit to all these things that weren't true. And then, yeah, it was like a challenge too. I was like, yeah, okay, I can do this. Like, sign me up for New York. I'll make any story up. I'll do it.
So a couple things there I want to make note of, especially the first part about like the commitment is what it takes. And if you don't do it, and this is something that we've been talking about from day one, that all of these groups, there's this fear if you don't commit or don't complete or don't, stay with the group. And in religious groups, it's like God will smite you and you'll be blind or you'll be working at McDonald's or get cancer or whatever.
Also, her obedience was rewarded
Yes.
Yeah.
with a trip to New York.
And then creating FOMO around that. Like you're missing out on this amazing thing. And the scarcity mentality. It's like these little crumbs.
And in order to achieve the amazing thing, it requires your obedience.
That was the other thing when you talk about FOMO. When I first started back in 2006 or whenever it was, when I walked into the studio for the first time, there's all these people talking in whispered tones and like as if it was a Disneyland kind of thing. Anyway, it was called the Tornado of Talent, and she had a name for different things, but this was the Tornado of Talent was this thing where only the bravest of the brave performed, and they would get naked or sing or whatever your biggest fear was, you were supposed to do publicly. And I never did it for years. I never crossed that line into it because I started to get trashed on so bad in class that I never believed I was good enough to do the Tornado of Talent. But it was this thing that other actors who were so brave and talented did. And then that took them up a notch and they became the ones to admire in the class. But I imagine if I had actually gone to see the Tornado of Talent, it would have looked pretty messy now that I think back. But in my head, it was this like Oscar-winning performance that people were doing.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Tell us what the Tornado of Talent was like. Let's get into like what life was like in this group.
I sang, and it was interesting because about the obedience, I did it because I felt I had to. And singing isn't that big of a deal, but I made it seem like it was a big deal so I could just go do it and get it over with and then be called brave. So I was kind of gaming her system where I was like falsely, just to avoid the conflict, just to avoid the nonsense. I would make it seem like, oh my God, I can't do this. This is so scary. And then I would do it. And I was just so brave. And she would tell me how brave I was. And that was it. It was very silly. But there was that mystique, like it was a mecca. A friend of mine who did it, she did stand up. She was a bit before my time, but she did stand up. And then she went on to be an amazing stand-up comedian. So some things good did come out of it. But the undercurrent of control and obedience was really prevalent.
I think that's a good point to make. And I'm sure any actor who's done the work will attest to like, you have to overcome certain fears to be a depthy actor. Like you just have to, right? And so finding someone you trust to take you there is so important. But just hearing you speak about specifically the tornado of talent, which I also avoided like you.
There's another caveat too. It's like when you're going to take an acting class and someone presents a process to you, the only way to find out if that process works well is go all in. And so you're going to have to put trust into some sort of method. And here's someone who's built some credibility amongst other people, which is why you're there. And you guys are going all in and trusting a method.
I mean, you're broke for a long time as an artist. So money is a huge deal. You're working 3 jobs to be able to afford to pay for an acting class.
She abused a system. She leveraged a craft.
She did. And I kind of want to dig in a little bit just to paint the picture for people who I make some assumptions. You know, Nippy too is also an actor. For those people who aren't actors, what it looked like is, again, walking down this dark hall into a dark room with slanted seating, so like a little mini arena, right? And then a black stage and black curtains and lights on the stage, so like a mini black box in a classroom. That's the classroom. And it would often be scene study, which means you're working on a scene with another partner for the month, usually, right? But before you go up on stage and perform the scene, you do a methodology that was not hers. Where did relaxation come from originally?
It's a battle between a couple teachers. They've got an argument going from the past.
But relaxation is you're sitting on a chair. Can someone describe how to do relaxation?
Just this darkness comes over my body when I think about relaxation in that space and every other space after that. So the basics are you sit in a chair and you start with the breath, and then where you feel tension in your body, you move that body part to try to release the tension in your muscles so the emotion can flow through it. Because we close ourselves up throughout the day, we build tension in our muscles, we shut everything down. So the point of relaxation is basically to clear yourself so you're a clear vessel, so that when you go to your scene study work, there's no tension or held emotion in the way.
And you eventually put it onto text too after you move it through the body. So you'll be like, oh, my shoulder's tense. You kind of like, you can't really see me, but you're kind of moving your arm in this way to release it and move it through. And then you're usually either vocalizing just on a sound and then eventually putting it on a monologue. However, her version did eventually change to a thing called the orchestra.
Oh, I never heard that.
Which was super fun. Oh yeah, that was fun. Because you're all up on stage, like all the actors are up doing relaxation at once. It's not one at a time. So you walk in, you grab a chair, you're sitting on the stage. So that if you were an audience member or an auditor watching the class, it would look like on the stage, 15 to 10 actors sitting in black folding chairs, moving their arms and like crying and saying Mary Had a Little Lamb or doing a Shakespeare monologue.
Nippy would have hated this so bad. Nippy would have left so fucking quick. I can't even tell you. I haven't done this in 20 years. Can someone make a sound?
It'd be like, and then you start shaking and she'd be like, yes, go with that, follow it. And then eventually an emotion would break through and he'd either be screaming or crying or laughing. And then she would, I don't know, do her own interpretation of that and tell you to walk you through like why you hated your mom or something.
And actually, before I turn to the orchestra, because I just went through emails recently looking at the trajectory of the different amalgamations of this class, like what it went through. So I think it was around 2013 or 2014, they did a trip to Jamaica, the first trip, where that was like they were doing relaxation and all these actors went and came back, because after that, the email started. It's similar to the tornado of talent. The email started to be about the major shift that had happened in the artwork. And now we have a new direction that we're following. And we're starting with something called the equation and the blah, blah, blah. I mean, the document that she sent is 4 pages long, and it's about all the new terms that they had picked up in this Jamaica class, and then the New York intensive and the LA intensive. And then something was introduced called the orchestra. So before they got to the orchestra, she had started bringing in calling yourself out during relaxation. So what was that called, Brooke?
Speaking out.
Speaking out was your way of calling yourself. So she wanted us to now be further along in the work where she didn't have to call us out for our blocks. We were supposed to be able to name our own. It would be like, I'm moving my shoulder now, right? I've got my arm up. I'm moving my shoulder, breathing into the tension, but I can feel Jane in the room and I'm jealous of her and I want her body. And so that's making me self-conscious of my own body. And I can't breathe down to my stomach because I'm so full of anger and then you'd start making all these sounds and she'd be like, yes, there you are. You're in your truth. And what would you say to Jane if she was standing right in front of you and you'd be like, I hate you and you make me think about my mother and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it was like you versus this other student in the room, when really the class before, she would have put the notes in your head saying, why don't you just be honest about your jealousy towards Jane?
The last month I did, Michelle was a student. So she was in the orchestra and she kept calling me out. And I was 22 at the time and I was completely in like a frozen state. Because here's my godlike coach just attacking me in the orchestra constantly about how she couldn't do the art because I was there, how I was sucking all the talent out of the room. And then I had my other coach trying to mediate it.
Why was Michelle a student?
Because she wanted to study. I have no idea.
Because it moved from the speaking out stuff. And then there was these big trips that happened. And in these experiments on the beach and everything, people were like in these tropical environments, students. And remember, at this point, she had created a hierarchy. So the bottom third could go to these weeks in Jamaica. The middle third could go these weeks and the top third could go these weeks. And it was based on your ego, basically, and your willingness to submit. So then these groups did these relaxation things, and that turned into an orchestra thing where you were focusing on your own work, but also calling out other people, and they were calling you out. And sometimes it was beautiful. It was a beautiful artistic experience where people were working together and aligned, but then it also turned very dark and people turned against each other. Actually, in 2006 or 7, I remember Michelle sitting in a present exercise with a male student. And this was when I was in my early 20s, because a male student was in resistance. She sat in front of him in chair exercise, and they started to admit like sexual attraction to each other. And this young male student, like imagine a teacher sitting in front of you, making eye contact with you, breathing with you and saying, tell me what you're thinking right now. Tell me what you're feeling. And him having to say, and you would start to mine through your own head to think, what can I say here that's okay? Because I don't want to insult this person. I don't want to lie, right? Like, what if you were to say, I'm not attracted to you? Then she would say, is it because I'm Black? Or is it because I remind you of my mother? Like, she would use these things against you. So that stuff, years of that turned into this bizarre orchestra scenario that Brooke will talk to. But she would put herself in these positions, which was really scary and damaging.
Is this the young man that became her boyfriend?
Oh, no. This was like 10 men before that. She destroyed so many men before that kid.
Yeah, you reminded me of something because I was there before the orchestra. It was just relaxation. But I remember in relaxation, and maybe this is just me, but tell me if you relate to this, but like sometimes I was actually getting relaxed, but more than anything, I was trying to show that I was relaxed so that I could get approval and like move on with the exercise. Like I was so conscious of where she was in the room and like if she could see me or not see me, or like if I sounded like I was relaxed. But there's just so much like you're just trying to prove yourself to like go up the hierarchy versus actually do the work.
Because you're proving yourself to one person who had all of the say over if you were relaxed or not. That is a bizarre situation to be in. You take it into your own head as you're watching her talk about other people's work. So then you're assessing what relaxation is based on her assessment of other people's work as well. So there's no free thought. It is all Michelle's point of view.
Yeah, that's taking away the critical thought. You had to just say yes and agree with what she said, whether or not it was true. And she became this like beacon of truth. She was the one that everyone would rely on to see if like this was actually going well. And it might not have been.
Here's a specific example. You'd be sitting with all the students watching somebody's work, and she would say, I don't believe you. And if the student resisted her and said, I'm telling the truth, she'd turn to people in the students sitting around her and say, am I wrong here? You know what? Let's put it out to the students. Does anybody see truth happening up there on the stage? And then if you spoke out and said, actually, maybe I believe them, she'd say, well, that's because your ego is up right now because you got torn apart in your last scene. You're still sitting there in ego and you're a liar, and your liar recognizes their liar.
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do was just everyone shot their hand up in agreement. And then you had to look out to 15 people also calling you a liar.
And then I'm sure those low moments were then covered up with moments of acknowledgement or like getting the gold star for some brave work. And then you keep going for that moment.
Oh gosh, the good notes were like everything.
Yeah. What was that like when Michelle shone her light of approval on you?
Oh God. It's like icky to talk about. It was just like you did it. You got the gold star. Like I honestly felt like I had like finished a marathon or something. Like it's so toxic to talk about now and it's so icky to bring up. But when I got even just a simple like the nod and I believe you was like, oh, like everything. Like that's how addicting it was. And then when she really praised you on like a monologue or something, like really went off, it was like everything. Like you felt like, oh my gosh, my dreams are coming true. You know, Michelle's telling me that I'm probably, you know, going to book something soon or whatever it was. Like it was just like a step towards your goal and you felt like you were getting there. And it's so icky to talk about now because it's like one toxic acting coach saying that, but it really did feel like everything.
Well, I left before the orchestra, so I did miss out on that. I just found myself obeying a lot so I could get the gold stars. We had a weird relationship because I produced theater and my toxic boyfriend at the time produced movies that Michelle would audition for. So I didn't really piece this together until much later. She had me immediately on a hierarchy. I was put above because I could offer her something. I could offer her potential jobs. And I didn't think of it that way at the time, but she would say things to keep me in that relationship because her notes were never acting notes. They were always personal notes. And so it would be things like, this boyfriend will love you like nobody else will love you. You need to stay with him. And I'd go, yeah, you're right. You're probably right. Like nobody else is going to be able to love me. So I should stay with this guy who's absolutely horrendous. And the life notes, that's where the problem really lies. Because if it were just about acting, if you were just going into that room to become a better actor, great. Do the hard stuff. That's fine. Get naked if it helps, whatever. But when you get involved in life notes and you do comply, it's not right. Like she's not a therapist. She's an acting teacher.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're taking deep breaths when we cover the enraging stuff that cult jerks are up to. Let it out, as in the yoga practice. Inhale positivity, exhale negativity. That's for you, Sarah. We got this. No hulking it out, all you little hulksters. And if you need some helpful resources on the topic of cult recovery, check out our website at alittlebitculty.com. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Does anyone know her history? Where did she study?
She studied under a student of Lee Strutt.
Yeah, she had a teacher who I'm in contact with a little bit, but she studied with her for a year essentially, and then went to Gastown for a year. I mean, this is kind of what I've pieced together. And then she opened up a studio.
And she would speak out against formal university training. Because I remember I started a degree and then I felt shame about going into university and left university to pursue acting full time.
How old was she?
Well, now she's like 60 something. So she was late 30s when she started.
And I do want to go back for a second because that question about what the good notes felt like, I have a very good example of a journey with this. So I was in a session. And I have two examples. One is something I watched and one is one I experienced. So there was another student that I was studying with and we're good friends now and she's awesome. There was a lot of hard stuff that we went through in that class at the time. And she had gotten notes about her partner who was in the class as well. So both people were together. And when I was watching her notes, it was a lot of, you're trying to destroy your partner's career. You want to take this person apart. You are jealous of them. You don't want them to succeed. And then she would warn him, she's trying to destroy your relationship. You cannot let this person take you down. So this was just an example of turning couples against each other, which happened in the studio. And these were two very driven, motivated, beautiful artists. And they're okay today. But at the time, this relates to the second part, which is, so that was how they were being set up. And then there was my notes, which in this particular session were, Erin, do you know that you're a homewrecker? And I had to sit in those notes in the middle of 20 people at the time. And I remember being so taken off guard by that question. Like, these were notes after I had tried to do a scene. And do you know that you're a homewrecker? I didn't. And then because I had been torn apart so much in the previous sessions, I was desperate to not be in resistance again. It was like probably an hour of her berating me and questioning me in a way where I sat there and I was desperately trying to think of examples that I had where I had slept with a married man, where I could prove that, yes, I was a homewrecker, because I wanted to admit that I knew that I was a homewrecker so that I could get out of this. And so then I did admit it, and I came up with stories in my head. And the thing is, there was a thing about her where you believed she knew more about you than you did. She just knew because she was who she was. She knew. She's an oracle. And she would say things like, oh God, this is just, it hurts me. I don't want to say these things to you. I don't know how I know these things, but I do. And then she would say the thing, and she'd be like, Erin, do you know that you're a homewrecker? And so that eventually I admitted it. And it became this thing in the classroom where Erin is a homewrecker.
Damn it. You were in my home 2 weeks ago. You could have wrecked my home, you evil little homewrecker.
I know. So then this couple, anytime I would come near them, I was so self-aware. It became like I couldn't even talk to a man in the classroom without thinking in my head, I'm trying to destroy him and his family, and I want to sleep with him, and feeling like all the women in the classroom saw me as this. And they did. Like, this friend of mine and I recently talked, and she said, I just knew, because I knew that you were going after my partner, and we've apologized to each other and addressed this. But she said, I became obsessed with that because I knew that I was second place, and I knew that you would take him from me. So then it was painful. And then eventually I was put in a scene with the guy that she was dating, which, let me tell you, when you're in a scene as a homewrecker with the teacher's partner, it's a really uncomfortable place to be. Like, I just couldn't breathe without thinking that I was trying to seduce someone. That's the weight of what that became.
Did she give you a scene where it was physical? Like, was there a romantic element to it?
All the time. And she would micromanage my physical behavior through it. That's not your sexuality, Erin. No, Erin, you're not being truthful yet. Erin, is that really how you behave sexually? And I'd be like, I've actually never been in a position where I have whips and chains, and I'm like, I don't know what I would do with these things. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you want from me. And then that kind of a response, if I broke enough and said, I don't know what to do right now, she would say, well, now you're playing stupid. And this is what resistance looks like. Can everybody watch this closely so we don't waste time in the next class? I'd like everybody to see what resistance looks like. This is an actor in resistance. It was such a mind fuck when I look back to that. And then this goes around to that note where it's a positive thing. She gave me scenes of Marilyn Monroe. And then I was very good at being drunk and high and playing these broken women. And I got a lot of them in class. And they were a joy for me to do a lot of the time, but she would say things whenever she would decide I was doing good work. It would turn into, you are this generation's Marilyn Monroe. I want everybody to take note of this. This is why the resistance is so high in you, because you are this generation's Marilyn Monroe. Now, when I think back to that, I'm like, so did she mean because I'm a homewrecker? Or did she mean because I have a history with addiction? Like, does she mean I'm actually a good actor? I have no idea how to apply those notes to an acting career. I have no idea what any of it means. I still, to this day, look back at a lot of her notes and think, what did she mean? Where was that coming from at the time? But the thing is, she probably was just pulling it out of her ass at the time.
Totally. Knowing what I know now, I think she was just trying to see what, like, who would agree to what, like, how obedient would people be? What would people accept? Just a test, like, let's the most obscure thing. Homewrecker. Let's see how she handles this.
What's the end game?
I think just like beating you down enough and breaking you down enough that you'll just like follow her for eternity.
So you think she enjoys the berating and the abuse and doing that?
Yes.
That's her work.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you would have to a certain extent.
She used to be nice. She changed. And I was trying to think the other day, when was the big change that happened? And I think there's a couple students that started to study with her that she saw these are lifers. There's some real stuff I can do here. Like she just got better and better and better as she went at seeing people's brokenness and knowing how she could manipulate them into staying in the class and doing things for her. I don't know who Michelle would be without her community of actors around her. And without being a teacher, I don't know what other skills she has, like how she would survive.
She had a little entourage, Nip, of people that would do things for her and like still has it.
So you just think she likes the power, the attention.
Yeah, I think she was testing people a lot. I think she was testing how far can I push them? And if they push them so far and they still stay, then they're like, quote unquote, like trustworthy or worthy or whatever her word is of that. And then she has, you know, a few people who are lifers who have passed all the tests and that do take care of her in a way. And I think they give her what she needs emotionally and sometimes like physically, in the sense where they're like driving her around or like doing errands for her.
It's more than just driving her around, rather, and doing chores for her and massaging her feet. There's a group of people that fund her travels around the globe. So these group of actors who are Canadian will go and study in New York without a permit to do so. They'll go study in Italy without a permit to do so. They're following her all over the place, funding things, building her a house, and they don't have the actual papers to do so. So they're at risk of getting themselves in trouble with the law. And that's never really brought up. But there has been people who have come down to the United States, gotten caught for traveling down to study, and then been banned from the United States for 5 years. It's on the actor for doing so, but there's no thought about other people in what she's doing. She just has this little world where they all orbit around her and follow her all over the globe and fund her. But there's no thought. It's under the radar. They're special. They can do this. A lot of it's nonsense because it isn't about the acting. No. It's like the acting part of the thing that she's built is secondary. If it were about the acting, then the acting would get better.
You know what she said once? She said, she basically was like, why would you want to be a successful actor when you could stay in the lab and be a really great studio actor forever? And we could just like be in the lab, like doing these experiments. And I was like, I don't think anyone wants to do that.
That became the most important thing, was that room and putting the effort into that room. And if you went away, you were punished or criticized, or there would be withholding afterwards. So if you went away to work in another city, booked something else, she'd be, I'm worried about you. I don't think you're really serious about acting. It's like, what? I just booked something and worked a couple of episodes in another city. Well, how am I not serious?
There's an actress who's killing it, who's been successful for a very long time. I was thinking about this the other day, how crazy it was. We were in Toronto in the studio. This actor would be filming in Vancouver, wrap on a Friday, fly to the studio Saturday morning just to be in the room for a day, and then fly back to filming. And you know who it is, Alberta. And this actor would be admired because of her commitment. And Michelle would say things like, I don't get it. She's crazy. I don't get you. You're crazy. You want to be in this room all the time. I don't get it.
Erin gets the award for the best Michelle Lonsdale Smith impersonation, FYI.
Yeah, you're killing it though. It's great.
She kind of turns into a British woman when I do her. I don't know why.
We should have a contest where Nippy impersonates Vanguard. And then, oh my God, can you imagine Keith Raniere and Michelle Lonsdale Smith in conversation?
Be a lot of gaslighting.
That'd be amazing.
That would be a cool experiment. That's an experiment I would sign up for, just watching them.
It sounds like they'd both be naked within like 30 seconds.
He's way too old for her.
No, that's just where it's all headed for them now, right?
I think if you put the two of them in a chair in present exercise, they would both just implode. There wouldn't be any words. They'd just both go.
It'd be a spontaneous combustion. I just want to kind of recap, because I think it's always important for people to understand that all of these things have good elements. Obviously, you're kept in partly because of the obedience. You want to be a committed actor. You think somewhere if you leave, you're never going to be a successful actor, which is part of that sort of built-in phobia, right? But to recap what I'm hearing, tell me if there's anything I'm missing. There is something, and there has been, I think, like since acting classes existed, something very powerful about being with other actors and being inspired, about seeing people do deep work and be vulnerable and be open and like not care. It's like nobody's watching, not be aware of them being there and just have a private moment on stage. And what a beautiful gift it is to be able to do that. And I think that a lot of this does facilitate that. So like with a lot of these things, there's these two sides of it. There's like some good elements, and then there's the dynamic with the teacher and the class and the gaslighting and the obedience and the us versus them. Remember when I said how I left, and one of the things that I didn't have the word us versus them, I just said insular. Like everyone in that group, like they think that they're the best and all the other acting classes suck. You know, like this is the only place, this is the real deal.
I left an acting class because the teacher started criticizing another method and said that to the student, that method's fucking you up. And I was like, how'd you know that? To me, it just seemed like I don't look at someone's process and go, oh, I can recognize their method. So I left.
Well, what drew me to the studio time and time again was I would go study at other places and they would never be the work ethic that matched that. So it wasn't classes that went on from 5 to 7 hours. I think it was ingrained in me from the beginning when I first started to work at Michelle's studio that what I was capable of doing. So she showed me that I am able to be in a classroom for 5 to 7 hours and have focus and determination and take hard notes and still pick myself back up and go home and sit with that stuff. And so it did teach me resilience in a way that I think was unique to that experience. And so then when I would go study, which can be part of the toxic part of it too, because I would go to regular classes and it wouldn't feel that high. It would feel so mediocre because I was used to sitting in a studio until I was like bleary-eyed, trying not to fall asleep, sitting up. And the commitment was so high. And then the commitment of running the lines and what memorization took and how scared I was to go into the classroom without being fully memorized. It taught me how to memorize the lines in plays like nothing else. So there was a level of work ethic that I felt was a beautiful thing that I learned in there. But that also meant I was around people that matched that commitment. So I was in a room with some of the most committed, artistic, creative human beings I've ever been in, really. And sometimes I still question that to think, but how much of that was the studio talking to me and telling me that that's what it was? But even to date, I've made short films with students outside of the studio. I've done monologue slams outside of the studio. And some of that work that I did is some of the most creative, beautiful stuff I've ever done. And it was with people from the studio. So it was with these actors that I really bonded with and loved dearly. And then Jamaica, when I went for this 11-day intensive, and when I went to New York for this 8-day or whatever it was intensive, being in another place where I don't have to worry about my job and my family and I'm just immersed in acting, I still look back on that and I'm like, oh, that was some of the most beautiful. I'm just so grateful I got those experiences in my life where I got to be in Jamaica doing Tennessee Williams, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, hot and sweaty and in like silk pajama or silk negligee. You know, my artist was so happy sometimes getting to explore that stuff. When do you ever get to experience that, you know? So that stuff is the beautiful stuff. There are the opportunities that were there, but then there's a dark side to it. But that beautiful art that we got to make was why we all kept coming back.
I think that's so important because people would say, like, why don't you just leave? Like, if it was so bad, why don't you go? And part of it is because of those good experiences. The good outweighs the bad until it doesn't. We'll talk about that next. Any other good nuggets anyone wants to share before we wrap part 1?
Yeah, I can share. The community of actors was also very inspiring to be around. Like, it was so lovely to be around people my age that were acting, that you could just talk, kind of shop with them and they got it. They were all committed. And I mean, same, I went to New York and some of my favorite memories too are like walking around the streets of New York, like running lines with my scene partner. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a real actor. Like, it was so cool. And it's one of my favorite acting memories, I think, is just being in New York and studying. It was so cool. Another thing that I think I have a strength from that class, especially because I'm doing my postgrad in art therapy, I'm really not afraid of emotions at all. Like, somebody can throw any emotion at me and I've probably seen it 10 times more intensely in the studio. And also body tension. There was a lot of emphasis on relaxation, like holding tension in your jaw or in your forehead and your shoulder. Yeah, as I'm clenching my jaw, I say that. But especially with when I was acting, I could feel it in myself. But also when I'm working with clients, I can see if there's an emotion, and I'm not going to pry as much as the studio did and Michelle did, but it is part of like the therapeutic process to comment on noticing, like, oh, I noticed that you have a bit of tension in your jaw after you said that comment about whatever. So those are skills that I think I did really gain from the studio and the community. So there were positive things and positive skills I got out of it.
Alberta, anything you want to add?
There was definitely beauty in the community. And where I came from as an actor before jumping into this studio was I had a work ethic and I would rehearse, 30 hours a week with 3 different scene partners and was really into it. I loved acting. The work ethic is different in this studio because you're not actually really allowed to rehearse. You just run lines. You don't get together and like work out a scene. You're just supposed to spend time together and run lines. That's it. Maybe it's changed now. So the work ethic was more about your devotion and spending time in the studio and putting in free work and doing errands, organizing parties, raising funds. That was the work ethic. Being a part of this community was just the work ethic. And then when you didn't study, when you left class, that community was gone. You were considered a civilian or other then. So the community is really fake in a way, which is interesting because the studio is all about truth, but it's empty because as soon as you decide that you don't want to go to Jamaica or as soon as you decide you need to take a break from studying, that community is gone.
Right. So Culty red flag number 1, you can't leave.
I remember sitting in an audition once after I'd left. I'd probably been out for about a year. And somebody from the studio walked up to me and I was like, "Oh, hi, how are you doing?" And they were like, "Before we talk, I need to know if you're in or out." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, I thought they were joking. I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, in or out with what?" They're like, they repeated the question. And I was like, "Are you talking about the studio?" Like, it was so weird. They would not converse with me further until I told them if I was in or out or not.
Yeah, and I never got sucked into doing favors and stuff for Michelle. That was never part of my thing. There was other people that were way more. She had monitors in the class. Like, I think that started maybe in LA. I was never trusted enough because I was in resistance probably for my entire acting. I would go in and it was very hard. I would say Michelle probably said I was in resistance until the last 2 years of my commitment to her, which ended up in Toronto and which broke my brain. So after those 2 years of full-time commitment in Toronto, I snapped. But previous to that, because I was in resistance for so much of what was going on, I was never trusted enough to be the person, to be one of the people doing things for her.
Lucky for you. I want to hear about the snapping and the final straws. We're going to save that for part 2. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories of how you discovered the studio, what was good about it, what was bad about it, all the messy shit in between. So we'll see you next week on A Little Bit Culty.
This podcast is brought to you by Citizens of Sound, a podcast production agency committed to developing and launching shows with gravity and depth. From conception to launch, Citizens will partner with you every step of the way, whether you're an actor, business owner, doctor, fitness coach, hairstylist, or influencer. Connection is the future of communication. Jump on board with Citizens of Sound today and start your show. Go to citizensofsound.com and follow them on Instagram. And trust me, it'll be a really good decision for you.
This is a long episode. Come back next week for part 2. In the interim, do read the article if you haven't already, and have a great week.
Great segue.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred. True story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.